What's going on, guys? Evan Preco here. You are watching the SG1 Sports Big Ten Football channel. In this video, we're going to recap the Big Ten football games that took place over Week 8. And before we do that, I want to start off by apologizing for this video coming out later in the week than it normally does. I was in an area for fall break that had very little to no Wi-Fi, so I was not able to create any content. So I just want to apologize that this video was coming out later. And with that, let's get to the games. To start things off, we've got the Friday night game, number 4 Ohio State at Northwestern. And the final score of this game, Ohio State once again blows out their opponent. They beat Northwestern 52-3. For Ohio State stats, Justin Fields went 18 for 23 for 194 yards, 4 touchdown passes, and no interceptions. J.K. Dobbins was their leading rusher. He had 18 carries for 121 yards, averaging 6.7 yards per carry and a touchdown run. And Master Teague III also played pretty well himself. He had 7 carries for 96 yards, averaging 13.7 yards a carry and a touchdown run. Chris Olave was the leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for 60 yards, averaging 12 yards a catch, 2 touchdowns. And Austin Mack had a good game as well. He had 4 receptions for 50 yards, averaging 12.5 yards a catch and a touchdown. As a team, Ohio State ran the ball for 279 yards, and they had 480 total yards of offense. For Northwestern, Aiden Smith was a starting quarterback. He went 6 for 20 for only 42 yards, no touchdowns, and a pick 6. Isaiah Bowser was their leading rusher. He had 16 carries for 65 yards, averaging just over 4 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Riley Lees was their leading receiver. He had 3 receptions for 19 yards, averaging 6.3 yards a catch, no touchdowns. Northwestern ran the ball for only 157 total yards, and they had only 199 total yards of offense that turned the ball over twice as well. So for this game, this isn't really anything that anybody didn't see coming. This was pretty expected. Ohio State's a better team than they were when they played in the Big Ten Championship last year. Northwestern is a worse team than they were, much worse team than they were last year. After this game, they fall into 1-5, 1-6. So, they're just playing very poor right now. And granted, it's a very young team. It's a very inexperienced team. They don't have a lot from last year. So there's not a lot that they can really work with right now. But at the same time, Northwestern's not known for being one of those teams who, racks in the high recruits. They're really not. Which is why this is an interesting season, because usually we see Northwestern teams that don't have that much talent compared to other teams in the Big Ten in the country, and they're able to, be productive. They're able to go 7-5, 8-4, 9-3, and they're able to, play with some of these Big Ten teams, and they just have not been able to yet this year. They've struggled. Right now they are. I don't believe that they've won a conference game. I think that they're winless in the conference. And they are 1-5. So, obviously a struggling year for them. It's very interesting. I don't think that this is going to put Pat Fitzgerald on the hot seat or anything, but it's definitely going to be a learning curve for them, a learning experience for them, the players and the coaches included. So we'll see how they're able to finish the year. They're going to play Iowa next week, so we'll see what happens with that, and then they're going to play at Indiana and then Purdue afterward. So we'll see how they're able to play in the next coming weeks. For Ohio State, they're looking fantastic. Obviously, this is a much better team than what we saw last year, and they're playing fantastic. I think they were averaging 40 points was the margin of victory when they came into this game, and they won by 49. So they're looking really good. Next week, they're going to play Wisconsin, who just came off a bad loss. And that should be a good game to watch in Columbus. So we'll see how that game goes. But for Ohio State, they've got their foot on the gas. I really don't see them losing any games this season. This Wisconsin game is going to be pretty big coming up this weekend. And then the Penn State game a few weeks after that, and the Michigan game right after that game will be their big tests. But, they're just looking fantastic. They're looking like the best team in the country, in my opinion, and I don't really see them going anywhere else. So, a good win for them. We'll see what happens next week against Wisconsin. Next up on the list, we've got number 6 Wisconsin at Illinois, and Illinois pulls off what might be the biggest upset of the season. They won 24-23, and for their stats, Brandon Peters in his first game back, he went 9 for 21 for 174 yards, 2 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Reggie Corbin was back as well. He had 17 carries for 83 yards, averaging 4.9 yards a carry and a touchdown run. And Danny Navarro was their leading receiver. He had 1 reception for 48 yards, and it was a touchdown. Josh Imairbebe also played well. He had 2 receptions for 42 yards, averaging 21 yards a catch and a touchdown. Illinois ran the ball for 141 yards, and they had 315 total yards of offense. They did turn the ball over once, however. For Wisconsin, Jack Cohn went 24 of 32 for 264 yards, 1 touchdown, and an interception. A very costly interception it was. Jonathan Taylor had a pretty good game. He had 28 carries for 132 yards, averaging under 5 yards a carry, but he still got a touchdown. And Jake Ferguson was their leading receiver again. He had 5 receptions for 77 yards, averaging 15.4 yards a catch, and a touchdown. Wisconsin ran the ball for only 156 total yards, but they did have 420 total yards of offense. They turned the ball over 3 times, however. And for this game, it started out hot for Wisconsin. They scored on their opening possession with the touchdown pass, and then they ended up taking a 10-0 lead. Illinois would answer with a touchdown to make it 10-7, and then Colin Larsh hit a long field goal to make it 13-7 at halftime. They opened up the third quarter pretty good. They scored again to make it 20-7, and this was when I thought, all right, Wisconsin's going to pull away from what looked like a scare, but Illinois kept fighting. They scored again with a Reggie Corbin run to make it 20-14. Wisconsin would kick another field goal to make it a 9-point lead. Illinois would score again with about 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter to make it 23-21, and then after an interception by Jack Cohn, they would run the ball down the field and kick a field goal with no time left to win the game. For this game, I have to say, wow, this was a great game. A monster upset. Like I said, probably the biggest of the year so far. Because I think Wisconsin was favored by around 30 points. Illinois is coming in 2-4. They're 2-4 coming into this game. And for them to win this game is absolutely massive. This is a big loss for Wisconsin as well. It's interesting because I don't think this really... It hurts them. It definitely hurts them. They dropped 7 spots in the rankings. And they're not on top of the Big Ten West anymore. But I don't think this really makes them a less good of a football team. And now a lot of you guys are going to be confused when I say that. But think about it. We've seen good teams over the past few years lose these types of games. Like last week when Georgia lost to South Carolina. Do you really think that Georgia is now not a top tier football team because of that one loss? These things happen. It's very unfortunate that it happened, but it happens. If you're a team like Wisconsin, you're now 6-1. You're out of the top 10. But here's the thing: the 6 games that you won prior, I mean, those were still good wins. I mean, think about how they beat Michigan still. I still think that Wisconsin is one of the top football teams in the country. I mean, they're ranked 13, so they're not one of the top, but they're still pretty good. I still think that they're going to make a run for the Big Ten championship, and I think that they have a very good chance at doing that. And this is just a very unfortunate game for them. I think it's a fluke game. I don't think this defines how their season's going to go coming forward, because I don't think that they are a bad football team. I think they're a very good football team. I just think this is just one of those fluke games, upset games that you never really see happen. That happens rarely, and it happened on Saturday. It does hurt them. It definitely does hurt them, because now you have a conference loss, and you have to play at Ohio State next week, this upcoming weekend, and they just look unstoppable right now. So it would be very hard for them if they lose this game coming up. It'll be very difficult for them to be able to win the Big Ten West. I still think that they could be able to do it. I mean, they're going to have 2 conference losses. Minnesota's still undefeated. They're going to need basically Wisconsin. Let's say they lose to Ohio State next week, which is very probable. They're going to need to win out and have Minnesota lose one more game, probably to Penn State, which is looking realistic, and they win the West. And I think that a Wisconsin team that wins the West at an 11-1 record, goes to a Big Ten championship, will still compete for a playoff spot. Now, this game definitely hurt their chances at that. But, I mean, think back to two years ago, Ohio State. They're ranked number 6 in the country. They get blown out by Iowa. Absolutely obliterated. They come back from that game, win out the rest of their games, and beat an undefeated Wisconsin team in the Big Ten championship. And they just narrowly missed the playoffs. So think about it. I think that Wisconsin's season is fine. They're all right. They should not panic. They're going to be put in a very tough spot right now because it's going to make this Ohio State that much more of an important game. This Ohio State game that much more important if they don't win it, because then they're going to be sitting at 6-2 when there is an 8-0, 7-0, probably 8-0 Minnesota team ahead of them for the West. But I think that they still have a good shot if they lose next week at winning the West still. So yeah, we'll see how that works out. We'll see what happens for the rest of the season for them. I understand if a lot of Wisconsin fans are upset. I would be too. But I don't think that they should panic. It's very tough. This definitely puts them in a tough circumstance, but it's definitely a circumstance that they should be able to handle and have a positive outcome from. And hell, maybe this game will give them extra motivation for the Ohio State game. You never know. They might be angry about it. So we'll see what happens with them. It's interesting that they did lose this game because no one saw that coming. I just happen to think that this just is one of those fluke games that happens every once in a while. But yeah, that's all I have to say about them. I still think they're a good football team. This is still a big win for Illinois. I'm not sure how they're going to fare out for the rest of the season. Next week they play at Purdue, and we'll see how they're able to play in that game. All right, now we've got Purdue at number 23, Iowa. And the final score of this game, Iowa held on 26-20. And for the Hawkeyes stats, Nate Stanley went 23 for 33 for 260 yards, no touchdowns, and a pick. Mecky Sargent had 13 carries for 68 yards, averaging 5.2 yards a carry and a touchdown run. And Brandon Smith was their leading receiver. He had 9 receptions for 106 yards, averaging 11.8 yards a catch, and no touchdowns. Iowa ran the ball for only 102 total yards, but they did have 362 total yards of offense, and they had 1 turnover. For Purdue, Jack Plummer went 30 of 50 for 327 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. King Doerue was their leading rusher. He had 10 carries for 26 yards, averaging 2.6 yards a rush, no score. And David Bell was their leading receiver. He had a great game. He had 13 receptions for 197 yards, averaging just over 15 yards a catch and a touchdown. Purdue ran the ball for only 33 yards. They did have 360 total yards of offense, but they turned the ball over twice. And this is kind of the type of game that I expected to see. Iowa, obviously the better team because they're more healthy, holding on. Purdue, I knew they would play well. They would, score some points against Iowa because they looked really good last week when they played Maryland. But, Iowa, obviously being the better team, they win the game. The way this game went, it was pretty much all Iowa at the beginning. They kicked 3 field goals to make it 9-0, and then Purdue scored a touchdown with David Bell to make it 9-7, and that would be the score at halftime. Iowa would start the second half off well. They scored again to make it 16-7. They would then tack on a field goal in the fourth quarter to make it 19-7. Purdue got back in the game. They kicked a field goal to make it 19. They kicked 2 field goals, 2 field goals to make it 19-13. And then Iowa pretty much ended the game with a touchdown run by Sargent with 2 minutes to go to make it 26-13. Purdue would score a garbage touchdown with about 25 seconds left. But then, they would need the onside kick and a miracle to win, and they didn't even get the onside kick. So Iowa was able to win that game. So I guess it wasn't as close as the final score ensues, but still a good win for Iowa, in my opinion. They now move to 5-2 on the season. Purdue falls to 2-5. Coming up for Iowa, they're playing at Northwestern, and that should be a pretty easy win for them. And then they have to go to Madison and play the Badgers, and we'll see what happens with that game. That could be very interesting. Iowa already a two-loss team. Wisconsin could very well be a two-loss team going into that game, so that could be a huge game in the Big Ten West, with basically the winner of that game needing Minnesota to lose a couple games, and then they'd be able to advance to the Big Ten championship. So yeah, I mean, Iowa plays at Wisconsin, and then they play Minnesota right after that. So let's say they win those two games. They would then be the front runner team for the Big Ten West, in my opinion. Minnesota would still have one loss only, but then they have to play Penn State, and then they have to play Wisconsin as well last week of the season. So we'll see what happens with that. But no, Iowa's looking pretty good, especially after a couple weeks where they struggled. They had lost two straight to Michigan and Penn State and fallen off in the rankings a little bit. But no, they made their way back up. They're now ranked number 20, so they moved 3 spots after beating Purdue. And Purdue, I mean, they played well the week before, so I'm going to go ahead and say that this is a good win for them. This is a good win for Iowa. And we'll see how they're able to play in the coming weeks. I think that game against Wisconsin is going to be very, very important. So we'll see what happens with that. For Purdue, just another unfortunate game for them. They're now 2-5, and it's not looking like it's going to be a good year for them. I mean, and it never really was looking that way anyway. But I don't think that they're going to make a bowl game because they pretty much need to win out in order to do that. I guess they can afford to lose one more game and still make a bowl game, but I just don't see that happening. They have to play Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Indiana. Wisconsin is a good team. Indiana's playing really well right now, and it'll be interesting. We'll see what happens with them. And there's not really much to talk about Purdue because I pretty much covered it in other videos. They're a very injured football team right now. Very unfortunate for them. I don't know when they're supposed to get Rondale Moore back. I don't believe they're going to get Sindelar back this season, but I think Rondale Moore is supposed to come back at some point. It just sounds like it's kind of a game-to-game basis right now. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see if he does come back. That will obviously give them a spark on and off the field. So we'll see if he does come back in the next couple weeks, if they will be able to pick up the pace and start winning some football games. Next up, we've got number 20 Minnesota at Rutgers, and Minnesota blew out Rutgers 42-7. Tanner Morgan went 15 of 28 for 245 yards, 2 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Rodney Smith was their leading rusher again. He had 19 carries for 111 yards, averaging just under 6 yards a carry and 2 touchdown runs. Tyler Johnson was their leading receiver. He had 6 receptions for 130 yards, averaging 21.7 yards a catch and a touchdown. Rashad Bateman played well as well. He had 4 receptions for 72 yards, averaging 18 yards a catch exactly, and a touchdown. Minnesota ran the ball for 198 yards, and they had 443 total yards of offense. For Rutgers, Johnny Langen got the start again. He was 9 of 19 for only 48 yards. No touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Isaiah Pacheco was their leading rusher. He had 15 carries for 50 yards, averaging 3.3 yards a carry and no touchdowns. And Eddie Lewis was their leading receiver. He had 3 receptions for 18 yards, averaging 6 yards a catch exactly, no touchdowns. They ran the ball for 141 total yards, but they only had 189 total yards of the offense, and they turned the ball over 3 times. So for this game, I mean, this was to be expected as well. Minnesota's playing very well. They're a good football team. They're a very good football team, and we all know how much Rutgers is struggling right now. This was all Minnesota from the start. They got an interception on Rutgers' first drive. Then it took them a few drives to score, but they ended up going 7-0 with about 4.5 to go in the first quarter, and it would be 14-0 at halftime. Minnesota would continue to score points to make it 42-0 at one point, and then Rutgers would score a touchdown with 3 minutes to go in the game, and the final score was 42-7. For Minnesota, they're playing very well. They're making a case to win the Big Ten West, especially with Wisconsin's loss. They're now in control of their own destiny, especially if Wisconsin loses this upcoming weekend to Ohio State. Minnesota's going to be in a fantastic position to win the West because They're going to play Maryland. I'm assuming they're going to win that game. So let's say they win that game and they go 8-0. The two closest teams behind them in the West are Wisconsin and Michigan. And assuming Wisconsin loses to Ohio State, the two teams behind them will both have 2 losses, which will put Minnesota in a very good position. Now, they do have a tough schedule coming up. They have to play Penn State. Luckily for Minnesota, it's in Minneapolis, but they still have to play Penn State. Then they have to play at Iowa, and then they have to play Wisconsin. So that's 3 tough games coming up for them, and we'll see how they're able to respond. This is really kind of the gut check time for Minnesota. At the beginning of the season, they were winning. They won their first few games, but they weren't winning by a lot, and they were to teams that they should have beaten by a lot. And now, over the past 3 or 4 games, they have just looked fantastic. They haven't really played anyone, but at the same time, they're blowing teams out. Like, their toughest opponent has been Nebraska, in my opinion, but they blew out Nebraska by 27 points. So, I mean, this Minnesota team is playing good football. And I think that they will continue to play good football, and these games coming up should be very fun football games to watch if you're a college football fan in general. So, yeah, that's all I have to say about Minnesota. For Rutgers, they're struggling. I'm feeling it for them because Chris Ash got fired, and they're gonna have someone new take over the program in December. I don't think they're gonna stick with the interim guy they got, but I'm feeling it for him as well because he's just kind of been thrown into this position where he has to take care of a very down football program, and it's very hard to do that. They play Liberty next week, and they are 7-point underdogs. They're 7-point underdogs to Liberty, and they play in the Big Ten. So that just says a lot about how Rutgers' season is going on right now. They have 1 win to Massachusetts, 48-21, and everything else has just been abysmal for them. So we'll see if they can, get a confidence win against Liberty, just to kind of put their heads up high. And then they have to play at Illinois, and then they have to play Ohio State, Michigan State, and Penn State, and I don't see them winning any of those last 3 games. So we'll see if they can just kind of, get some confidence, win some fun wins against Liberty and possibly Illinois. You never know. But other than that, struggling football season for them. It'll be interesting to see who they hire for head coach come the end of the season and how they kind of approach, how they finish the season and how they approach next season. Now we've got Indiana at Maryland, and Indiana won this game 34-28. And this was a very fun football game to watch. Michael Penix Jr. went 9 of 14 for 141 yards, 1 touchdown and an interception. He got hurt in the first half and was out for the rest of the game, so Peyton Ramsey played the rest. He went 20 for 27 for 193 yards, a touchdown pass, no interceptions. Stevie Scott III had 18 carries for 108 yards, averaging 6 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. Peyton Hendershot was their leading receiver. He had 6 receptions for 95 yards, averaging 15.8 yards a catch, no touchdowns. And Nick Westbrook also had a good game receiving. He had 6 receptions for 75 yards, averaging 12.5 yards a catch and a touchdown. Indiana ran the ball for 186 yards, and they had 520 total yards of offense and only 1 turnover. For Maryland, Terrell Pigram got the start. He went 17 of 27 for 210 yards, a touchdown pass, and a very crucial interception. Javon Leake was their leading rusher. He had 23 carries for 158 yards, averaging just under 7 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. And Dante Demas Jr. was their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for 82 yards, averaging 16.5 yards a catch and a touchdown. Maryland ran the ball for 173 total yards, and they had 383 total yards of offense, and they had 2 very crucial turnovers. Like I said a minute ago, this was a very back-and-forth game. If you're just a fan of good, close games, no matter who's playing, go watch this highlight. Go watch the highlights for Indiana-Maryland. This was such a fun game to watch and pay attention to. Indiana scored first to go up 7-0 right away. And then Maryland would answer to tie it up, and Indiana would retake the lead to make it 14-7 with Stevie Scott. And then in the second quarter, Maryland answered again to tie it up. Indiana would tag on a field goal, and Maryland would score to take the lead. and then Indiana would answer them just before halftime and score as well, and they'd be up. Indiana was up 24-21 at halftime. In the third quarter, Indiana scored again to make it 31-21, and then Maryland scored right at the end of the third quarter to make it 31-28. And then with about 3 minutes left in the third quarter, Indiana forced a fumble that put the ball right away in field goal range for them. They kicked a field goal to make it 34-28 with 2 minutes left, but then Pigram threw the interception with 1 minute left to lose the game for Maryland. So Indiana won 34-28, and this is a very good win for them. Indiana's a team that had been getting wins but hadn't played anybody. Let's recap. They didn't get their first win against a Big Ten team until last week, and that's Rutgers. So, their wins are against Ball State, Eastern Illinois, UConn, Rutgers, and now Maryland on the road, which is a good win for them. Their 2 losses were to Ohio State and Michigan, and they played very well in the Michigan game. Michigan State. They played very well in the Michigan State game, in my opinion. And for them to go on the road and win a conference game is big. They're now 5-2. They now only need one more win to make a bowl game, which is something they just missed in the 2 years prior. So they're looking pretty good right now. Next week they have to play Nebraska in Lincoln, which is going to be tough for them. But that could be another gut check game for them. If they could win that game, especially with the way their offense is playing and that struggling Huskers defense, if they could win that game, I think that this Indiana team could be considered, I don't want to say contenders for the East, because we already know that Ohio State is probably going to win the East. Possibly Penn State. They could win it as well. And I don't think Indiana compares to those two teams. But that would mean that Indiana's a pretty good football team from what I've seen so far. For Maryland, they're struggling. I'm not sure what's happened. I guess, the teams that they played at the beginning of the year. Syracuse is obviously not the team that we thought they were in the preseason. And then we thought that when Maryland blew them out, Maryland was going to be a threat for the Big Ten East, and they just have not been. They are 1-4 in their last 5 games. So they're struggling, and their one conference win is against Rutgers as well. So they haven't really beaten they haven't really beaten anyone, and they're struggling. So it'll be interesting to see how they play out the rest of the year, if they can make a bowl game or not, because that's what they're striving for. They play in Minneapolis against the Gophers next weekend, and then they have to play Michigan after that. And then after that, they have to play at Ohio State. So these next 3 games are crucially hard. And then they play Nebraska after that and at Michigan State. So the rest of the season is not easy for Maryland. And, I wouldn't be surprised if they won a couple of these games, but I wouldn't be surprised if they lost all of them at the same time. With the way they're playing right now, they don't have Josh Jackson. He's hurt. And Pigram, he's been up and down. He's had his ups and downs as the starter right now. But, with the way they're playing right now, especially defensively, I would not be surprised if they lost the rest of their remaining games, especially with how good the teams that they're playing are right now. So we'll see what happens with Maryland. They're struggling. Indiana's looking pretty good. We'll see if they can get that big 6th win to make a bowl game. But yeah, other than that, this was a great game to watch. Again, I highly recommend you watch the highlights for this game. It was very entertaining, and that's all I have to say about that one. All right, last but not least, we've got the big Saturday night game. We've got number 16 Michigan at number 7 Penn State. College game day was in State College for this game, so this was the biggest game of the week across the entire country. Penn State won this game 28-21. And for their stats, Sean Clifford, he went 14 of 25 for 182 yards, 3 touchdown passes, no interceptions. He also scored a touchdown on the ground as well. Ricky Slade was their leading rusher, however. He had 3 carries for 48 yards, averaging 16 yards a carry exactly, no scores. KJ Hamler was their leading receiver, and he's been having such a great season. He had 6 receptions for 108 yards, averaging 18 yards a catch exactly, and 2 touchdowns. Penn State ran for 101 yards, and they only had 283 total yards of offense. For Michigan, Shea Patterson went 24-41 for 276 yards, no touchdowns, and a pick. He had 34 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground as well. Zach Charbonnet, though, was the real rushing attack. He had 15 carries for 81 yards, averaging 5.5 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. And he really picked it up during the game. Nico Collins was their leading receiver. He had 6 receptions for 89 yards, averaging 14.8 yards a catch, no touchdowns. Michigan ran the ball for 141 total yards, and they had 417 total yards of offense. They did have a turnover as well. Like I said, the final score of this game, Penn State won 28-21, but it wasn't that close of a game for most of it. It was all Penn State pretty much in the first half. They scored 3 touchdowns to go up 21-0. And I mean, Shea Patterson was struggling in the first half. He threw an interception on screen pass. They were struggling to move the ball in the passing game, and he just was not playing well. He was getting pressured a ton, and he got hit and sacked a bunch of times. So he struggled. The offensive line didn't play great. But they picked it up with the running game. Zach Charbonnet scored with about 3 minutes left to go in the first half to put him on the board, 21-7, and that would be the halftime score. Charbonnet would then score again at the end of the third quarter to make it 21-14, putting Michigan back in the game. So Zach Charbonnet really carried this team, to put them back into the game when the other aspects of their offense was struggling. Their defense struggled at first, but they kind of picked it up a little bit in the second half. KJ Hamler would catch a touchdown early in the fourth quarter to make it 28-14, but then Patterson would score a touchdown run on a quarterback sneak to make it 28-21. Michigan then got the ball back with a few minutes to go in the fourth. It drove all the way down the field and then got stopped on goal to go, and they could not punch it in. On 4th and goal, Patterson threw a perfect pass to Ronnie Bell, and Ronnie Bell flat out dropped it in the end zone, and that pretty much lost the game for the Wolverines. It's interesting for the Wolverines. I mean, they played better than I thought they did. I did not think that it would end up being a one-possession game at the end, but it was. But with that being said, they still lost, and their postseason hopes are pretty much up in smoke. Their hopes of making the playoff are gone, in my opinion, and it's going to be very, very, very tough for them to be able to compete for a conference championship. I still think that's possible. It's extremely difficult, but I still think it's possible. But with where they are in the rankings right now, I don't see them making the playoff. I mean, they'll definitely let's say they do run the table and win the Big Ten championship. That means that they will have won games against Penn State, Ohio State, and either Wisconsin, Iowa, or Minnesota. Most people would think, hell, that's good enough to put you in the playoff. But I just think with the way they've been struggling recently, especially offensively, that's not going to happen. They could run the table, and it's not going to be easy at all. It's not, and it's probably not going to happen. But all I'm saying is that I wouldn't necessarily say it's over just yet. If they lose to Penn State, they just lost to Penn State. If they lose to Ohio State, then, yeah, it's definitely over. But I think that if they beat Ohio State, and if Ohio State were to lose to Penn State, then Michigan's won the East. All they have to really, really do is win out and hope that Penn State beats Ohio State and that Penn State loses to Minnesota or something. And I mean, and that's a lot to ask for. That is really a lot to ask for. But that's all. That's what has to happen. And if that happens, and it's realistic, it's very hard and probably not going to happen, but it is somewhat realistic. Then Michigan's won the East. I just don't see them being able to climb their way back into the playoff picture as far as the rankings go. So it's tough to have an opinion on Michigan right now because they're not bad, but this is not at all what a lot of their fans were expecting this year, especially with the way they started the season ranked number 7 or number 8 or something like that. So it's tough. It's tough on Jim Harbaugh because you can't really tell if he's going to be the coach next year. He might get fired because, they're not going to go to the playoff, which is something that a lot of Wolverines fans want. But we'll see what happens. I think that he's obviously going to finish out the rest of the season regardless. I think that if they somehow find a way to beat Ohio State, and let's say that they don't even go to the Big Ten championship, let's just say they beat Ohio State, they go 10-2, and they go to a good bowl game. I think he's going to keep his job. He's definitely going to keep his job if they beat Ohio State. If they lose to Ohio State and go 9-3, then I think that he's either going to get fired or he's going to move on. And there are already talks of him going back to the NFL and leaving Michigan. So he might just leave Michigan before he even gets fired. But it all depends on what happens against Ohio State in the game. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with them. As far as Penn State, they're playing very well. They're going to play Ohio State as well in the coming weeks, and that's going to be at Columbus, and that is going to be such a good football game. I cannot wait to watch that game. They have to play Michigan State next week, and then they go to Minneapolis after that. Excuse me. So we'll see how they're able to perform before the Ohio State game, and I'll cover that in the weeks coming up. And then we'll obviously be paying attention to what happens in the game against Ohio State. But that's all I have to say about that game. Big win for Penn State. Big win on the road. Whiteout game against a ranked team. And they're looking very good right now. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with them. And that pretty much does it for all the games this weekend. And with that, we'll get to not my rankings, but my groupings of the Big Ten teams. And they've stayed somewhat similar, a few changes. I'm putting Minnesota in the elites. So my elites are Ohio State, Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. I'm not going to move Wisconsin out simply because I think that that's just a fluke game. So Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Minnesota are my 4 elite teams in the Big Ten. 3 of them are undefeated, and 1 of them has a fluke loss. Excuse me. For my contenders, Iowa and Michigan, that stays the same. Middle of the pack is Nebraska, Michigan State, Indiana, and the rest from week before. I'm moving Maryland down into the bottom of the Big Ten just because now they have a losing record. They're losing to teams. They're losing at home to teams already in the middle of the pack, so I'm going to move them to the bottom. And Illinois, I'm keeping them in the bottom just because they still have a losing record. Big win against Wisconsin for them, but they still have a losing record. So my elite teams are Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. My 2 contender teams are Michigan and Iowa. My middle of the pack teams are Nebraska, Indiana, and Michigan State. And then my bottom of the Big Ten teams are Northwestern, Maryland, Rutgers, Purdue, and Illinois. So that's where I have those teams ranked. And yeah, let me know what you guys think. I'd really appreciate it if you would leave your comments for the video and let me know what you guys think about where I have these teams in the Big Ten. Let me know what you guys think about the games this week, the games coming up, the games from previous weeks. Let me know what you guys think about the teams, their situations, especially with Michigan and Wisconsin. Let me know what you guys think about them and how their losses impact them. And yeah, I would really appreciate that. And if you guys could leave a like on this video, that would be much appreciated as well. Subscribe to our channel. Subscribe to our main SG1 Sports channel as well. I thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a great day.